Today in this session we will have two speakers groups that are bringing great insights into the work of patient-oriented research in British Columbia, and we'll have a first presentation by Dr. Jude Kornelsen, who is an associate professor, Department of Family Practice, University of British Columbia, as well as Julia Bickford, Executive Director, Research Innovation and Evaluation and Business Support Unit Academic Lead for the Northern Center of SPOR. We'll have approximately 15 minutes for their presentation and 15 minutes for a Q&A. Hopefully you can pose directly your questions in the chat so we can see those questions, but I'm also going to be paying attention to the WUBA app in case there are also questions there. So yeah, you might be just display your slide whenever you're ready, Jude. And thank you, Jude and Julia, for being here with us today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, we're just going to jump right into it because we're both fairly enthusiastic. And I'm going to continue to share. There we go. So I'm, as Marcelo already said, I'm Jude Kornelsen. I'm in the Department of Family Practice at UBC, and really stoked to be here to talk with Julia about this project we're working on, which is at the heart of it, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, all about health equity. It's all about giving rural residents the opportunity to participate in clinical research, their expectations and experiences of health services research, to make sure that we're inclusive provincially as per the mandate of most funding organizations. And I realize entirely that Julia should have introduced herself first because this morning, Roberta, our elder Dr. Roberta, actually said that the people who travel the furthest should be the first ones to speak. And I loved that because I thought I'm actually going to weave that all the way through what we're going to be talking about because it's so relevant. So over to you, Julia.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jude. So my name is Julia Bickford. As Marcelo said, I'm the Executive Director for Research, Innovation, and Evaluation at Northern Health. And normally I would be situated on the beautiful Lheidli-T'enneh territory. So really glad to be a visitor here in Vancouver and excited to connect with you all today.
Yeah, and I should also add that I'm a visitor to Vancouver from the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish, specifically Homokimane and Chincotan-speaking peoples, colonially known as Salt Spring Island. So just a hop away, but not usually in Vancouver. So I'm delighted to be here as well. And we're just going to jump right into it. So the context of of what we're going to be talking about today is actually a SPOR-funded study that we started just a little while ago in September, and it's about looking at rural residents' experiences of inclusion in or exclusion from clinical research due simply to their geography, and their experiences of a health services research, namely whether, the kind of relational context that we so aspire to in community-based research, with local articulation of research priorities, returning data back to communities in a way that's of value to the community, and all the other things that go along with this, plays out, I should say. And we'll talk about this a little bit at the end a little bit more, but that's kind of our ticket into this session. So when we talk about putting patients first, or putting patients at the center of healthcare, we usually think of their engagement in healthcare decision making, and health planning. The basic ethos of inclusion has really gained traction in a substantive way over the past decade for sure, although probably not quite as prominently in health system planning, where we're seeing more and more pressure from those receiving the services to be involved in planning the services. So we're really shifting towards recognizing the value and the wisdom of local experience. But there's also another window through which we can look at meaningful ways, I think, to position patients at the center of the health system, and that's through their involvement in research. And in this context, I don't mean in research, study design, and implementation, but of course, that is super important as well. But the frame we're putting on this is recognizing the really important link between care that is provided to patients and the decisions around the system structure about how to provide that care to how to provide that care through policy, and the evidence that informs those decisions. So we from a patient-oriented research perspective, including rural patients and research studies, is essential to providing the evidence that reflects patients' lived experiences. It's absolutely essential if we want the evidence that actually works across the healthcare system. And what our experience has been over the past little while is that we have the provincial infrastructure, but like this bridge, it doesn't quite reach to all the rural communities, all the far-flung places of our province. And when I showed this picture to Julia this morning, she said, "Yeah, that's me standing on the other shore, not quite able to get on the bridge." So we're really looking at a systems approach to the infrastructure that we need to support rural communities, because absolutely, and Julia is going to tell us about all the exciting things that's happening in the north, and we've got other folks on, so I can put James on the spot, and I'm sure he's got examples of what's happening in the interior. And he just said no, so I've just lost my friend there. But there is a lot of work happening. It's just, again, creating the bridge to join it all together, and we're going to be talking about that. So we all know that rural populations face different realities: longer travel distance, fewer specialists, greater reliance on generalist and team-based care. And when research is based primarily on urban patients, the findings often assume infrastructure and access and a context that simply doesn't exist in rural settings. So excluding rural patients, and of course, never intentionally, but through omission of attention to the resources, to the infrastructure, to the health human resources that might be needed in a rural setting, limits the generalizability of evidence, and it actually risks widening health inequities, especially when publicly funded research is used to guide resource allocations in rural settings. If we don't include rural communities, we don't actually know what's going to work and what's not going to work. But, stated positively, and I'd like to be much more positive, including rural residents and research absolutely strengthens both clinical trials, health services research by testing interventions in real world conditions, which allows us to identify implementation barriers that exist, but also ensure policies are grounded fully in the diversity of the care context as per we see in rural, and the great diversity through rural, of course, as well. So I'm not going to talk a lot about justice and fairness, but in a nutshell, we are using Raoul's perspective, basically on justice and fairness in research. And he was a pretty neat theorist who talked a lot about the importance of social arrangements. In this instance, it would be the systems that generate healthcare evidence, arrangements that are just and fair. And they're just and fair only when they do not systematically disadvantage particular groups. So that's kind of his bottom line. I'll cut to the chase there. So when rural populations are underrepresented in research, the resulting evidence privileges those already better positioned within the healthcare system, which violates the fundamental principle of equity and opportunity. And he refers to this as the difference principle. And it's really important because it's a values proposition in correcting this that should underlie, I think, all the work we do in healthcare and in health system structuring. So from this vantage point, inequities in research participation and benefit, they can only be tolerated if they improve outcomes for the least disadvantaged. So excluding rural residents fails the test because it produces knowledge that often reinforces existing disparities in access and quality and outcomes, and normatively values what we've already done before. So this kind of, I meant now just to very quickly lay the framework and the groundwork, mostly, as you can tell, our values propositions about why we're doing this and why it's important. And now I'm going to stop with all the theoretical part of it, and Julia's going to take it over and make it much more interesting with some lived examples. So over to you, Julia.
This is great. Thanks so much, Jude. So some of you on the call might not be familiar with the context of Northern BC, and we're really thinking of the North as an extreme case example. So if we can get rural inclusion and research happening in the North, we can probably do it in other places in the province as well. So Northern Health, we serve approximately 300,000 residents in an area that is pretty much the size of France, so about 600,000 square kilometers. It's the largest health region in the province, covers almost 2/3 of British Columbia, and is largely rural, remote, and Indigenous communities. So just setting the context there for you. So I was hired in 2020, and one of my main tasks was really to support the development of research infrastructure in Northern Health to really support clinical research and clinical trials in particular, but also health services research. And at that point, researchers were quite frustrated because they couldn't do some fairly simple things because of internal capacity and processes in Northern Health, like blood draws, for example, or even some things around contracts. We didn't really have any policies yet developed to support research. So every research interaction with the health system felt ad hoc and like we were having to start things over and over from the beginning. And the other piece that we really wanted to emphasize is that we didn't just want to create processes and systems that worked for Prince George. We want inclusion in all of the North, across all of the North. So just like we don't want, health research to only happen in Vancouver, that is kind of Prince George can be a bit of a microcosm for that as well, where we don't want it just to happen in Prince George. We want research everywhere in the North. So we've been developing research policies, SOPs. It sounds very boring, but for clinical research in particular, it's highly regulated. These are really important infrastructure pieces that we've had to put in place as we try and build from the ground up. So we've got some great human resources in place, our clinical research manager, our clinical research nurse, a quality assurance coordinator. We've got people like Marcelo supporting patient-oriented research in the North, and Leanna at UNBC. So really important progress that we're making in some of the supports that are available in the North. And if we go to the next slide, it's really about our collaborative partnerships. And this is how things get done when you're in resource-constrained environments like the North. So one partnership I wanted to call it was the NCCR, or the Northern Center for Clinical Research. And this is a tripartite center between Northern Health, UBC, and UNBC. It officially opened in March 2022, and it's really the clinical research arm in Northern Health and the front door for faculty and staff who are interested in clinical research. And I want to call out Dr. Anurag Singh. He's the first appointed NCCR director, and he really supports that faculty development and clinical research through his role at UBC. And then in my role, I'm sort of helping the operational and infrastructure capacity within the health system. And together, as a group in the NCCR, we're all really interested in how do we learn from our communities to understand what the research agenda should be for the North. So I guess my main message here is we're too small to try and have organizations create their own infrastructure for research. We really have to do this together in partnership and collaborate and share resources. And that's just how we get things done. Lots of other examples, BC Cancer Northern Center, want to call them out as well. We work really closely with them and, trying to make sure that follow-up visits with patients can happen in home communities so that research is accessible to people and they're not constantly having to travel to Prince George for follow-up visits. Another example is CTAN, the Center for Technology Adoption and Aging in the North. I think Shannon Freeman was on in this conference as well. That's another great example of a tripartite relationship there. The next slide is just really about some examples of some of the studies that are happening, and I'm kind of favoring clinical research here, and I don't mean to. Health services research is also a really big part of what we're doing, but the clinical research, because it's so heavily regulated, like if we can get this going, it really speaks to some progress that we're making here in the North to open up these types of studies to participants in the North and patients in the North as well. So just a couple of examples there of studies. Our first phase 3 clinical trial just opened, Easy Kidney in Northern Health. And again, that's with Dr. Anurag Singh, a nephrologist in the North. So really exciting to see these types of studies becoming available to Northern patients as well. The next slide, sorry, how are we doing for time, Marcel? I know we started a little bit late, so can we have a few extra minutes? Sorry. Okay, great. I'll try and go quickly. I just want to talk a little bit about some of the health system challenges and the operational challenges. As many of you know, there's a lot of vacancy rates in many of our communities, and especially in rural communities. So things like lab services, for example, might be operating at a 50% vacancy rate. And so when that happens, there can be sometimes this feeling of scarcity in the health system and a perception that research is sort of extra work on top of the real work of providing care for patients, and that, it's somehow a drain on our resources. So the challenge, and I think the opportunity, is to demonstrate that One, research is part of care, and that's a cultural shift in how we conceptualize care, and it requires that cultural change. But then also that research can add capacity to the health system. When researchers understand the pinch points within rural communities, they can write grants with realistic budgets, provide important injection of funds to help ease that burden in small and rural communities. I guess another challenge is that there's often no alternatives other than Northern Health. Like there are no life labs. People make that assumption that, oh, they've got all the same kind of resources that we have in Vancouver. But when you go to do research in the North, really, there's some serious operational hurdles, around what's actually available in communities that need to be considered when we design studies that are going to be inclusive for participants in the North. I'll just leave it there because I know we're challenged for time here. A couple of researcher challenges. Part of it's not knowing how to navigate the health system. It can be a bit of a black box at some times. So really trying to create those supports and opportunities for researchers to engage with us early on so that we can help connect them with communities and with patient partners. And like I said earlier, some assumptions about what services are available in the North can be a bit of a challenge for researchers at times too, and having to kind of modify their research design if they're going to include Northern communities. And then finally, sorry, I'm taking too much time here.
No,
Just
that's
wanted to talk.
fine.
Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about some wins from my experience, some kind of infrastructure wins or wins that we've experienced in the North. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what I think are some key ingredients that are, to the secret sauce that underpins these wins. And one is, I think, senior leadership champions. So we happen to have a CEO and VPs that are really supportive of the vision for research in the North. We have senior operations officers in our facilities who have dedicated space in hospitals for research, which is incredible. It's a highly coveted space, right? And so having these champions, I cannot talk highly enough about having those folks in place and the importance of that senior leadership role in creating that culture of research in the organization. Obviously, a huge piece is around our patient communities, being able to have those opportunities to guide our research priorities. And this is where patient partners and community engagement are just so crucial to underlying these wins that we have. And in meaningful engagement is the key there. And then the strong relationship with clinical operations. I think this often gets overlooked, but when staff vacancies are really high, there's all kinds of competing priorities and pressures, and they can really be gatekeepers to research. So it's really important to get to know the clinical operations teams who are going to support research, to understand what are their challenges and needs on the ground in a day-to-day way, and ensure that they're part of the research so that it's not being done to them. In the same way that we want to engage with the patients as well and people in community. So just one of the lessons I've learned over my last couple of years here. Just wanted to quickly mention, we recently submitted a CFI, or Canada Foundation for Innovation grant. We found out we were not successful recently, but to me, I'm still considering this a win. It was a partnership led by UNBC. Really want to call out Dr. Sarah Gray at UNBC for leading that. The Lheidli First Nation, Northern Health, and NCCR. I really do think this is a win because the process of writing that grant allowed us to really articulate what are our research needs in the North. And I think we're extremely determined to continue to advocate for that. And hopefully one day we'll get there. So I'm going to pause there and pass it back to you, Jude.
Yeah, I'm just going to end really quickly on the building of the infrastructure. We have to finish our metaphor in a more positive way. And, Julia's provided some really good examples of how the North is moving towards a decentralized research model where it makes sense. And this is absolutely happening in pockets across the province, not just in Northern Health, with other initiatives. One in Cranbrook, for example, showing how clinical research can be decentralized to reach rural populations. So, it's not just theoretical what we're talking about. It's already occurring through distributed networks, through community partnerships, through digital engagement. And we're going to be looking at this over the next couple of months about how to strengthen rural research infrastructure. Because imagine if we had the infrastructure, what could actually occur? This is like in low resource environments that we're trying to do this in, and it's successful. Imagine if we actually could transform partnerships and look at, transforming from an urban privilege as research to a province-wide opportunity. So we're going to be looking at that over the next couple of weeks. months, actually, and we're delighted to take any questions if there are any. I'll end there.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jude and Julia, for this great project, as well as a panorama of initiatives of research participation through rural lenses. We have about 5 minutes for questions, and there's a question here in the chat. To what extent do we know or think that researchers closing the loop and bringing research findings back to rural communities members would help?
Ooh, that's a good question. Julia, I'll let you start, and then I'll add in.
Yeah, I agree, James. This is a good question, and feel free to jump off too if you have examples. But I do think that that is absolutely crucial. When people, when it becomes really extractive and you're only ever participating and never hearing back, or if studies don't even have a KT plan, or they do and they don't actually engage in what they said they were going to do. I think it ruins those opportunities down the road for trust building with communities where they feel like they're actually going to gain from the research, and it's not just extractive. So it's kind of setting up future projects to not be successful. No one's going to want to participate if they didn't think that that they were respected enough to hear the results of that work. So Jude, what do you think?
Yeah, so it's an excellent question that we actually need good data on. So we're trying to figure out how we can gather these data while completely respecting researcher confidentiality and privacy, and the fact that, for example, the RISE system is not meant to be used for things like that. So how we can actually figure out what the numbers are, but anecdotally, it seems, and so Julia's perspective was health authority, my perspective is community. Anecdotally, it seems quite low. So the question then becomes, as opposed to blame and shame, what can we actually do to enable that? And that's a way longer discussion, but there are some things we can do, which is actually, within the authority of the health authorities. For example, if a researcher is applying to do community-based research and you look back and see that they have not returned any data to communities, you don't approve their research, because it's a fundamental integral part of how we need to do research. It's a much longer discussion, and I would love to have it at some point, but thanks for the question. It's great.
Excellent. Maybe we have time for a very brief question, if there is opportunity, before our next speaker, if someone wants to. Yes, there's a comment and a question. As a researcher, I find it very hard to go about recruiting patient participants from rural and remote communities. Do you have any strategies to better reach and engage these populations?
Absolutely. So depending on and this is an excellent question. And Julia, that's what we're trying to do, is recognize that people who might not have a lot of rural exposure don't know where to start. It's not that it's not good intentions, it's that you don't know where to start. So there are different mechanisms and strategies around, there's a common phrase used in the rural communities: if you've seen one rural community, you've seen one rural community. And that gets at the difference that we see and the nuances in the context of rural communities. So there is value in that, but it's incredibly daunting to a researcher to go, okay, so how do I engage the 802 communities that we have across BC? And I'm talking about the unincorporated ones as well. So what we do is we stratify. There's methodological ways of doing it, by distance to next service, by population size, but there's also practical ways in engaging in provincial structures. And the one I have all the time in the world for and work closely with is the BC Rural Health Network, because they are a centralized group that has community members from way across from Atlan, literally from Atlan to Oliver to like everywhere across the province, and they're grassroots. So these are ground up communities that are looking at sustainable services in their communities. They're not top down, and they are brilliant. So if you want to reach out, Julia, I'd be happy to give you some more links and contacts if you're trying to recruit rural. And I really applaud your question. Thank you for even thinking about it. It's great.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Jude, Julia. Hopefully there's more opportunities at lunchtime to continue these conversations, and and go through these excellent questions. I also know that Rich BC is doing a fantastic job trying to reach out to rural, remote communities, etc. So stay tuned. They're doing an amazing job in incorporating these communities, etc. So yeah, the conversation should continue because there is a wealth of knowledge here at the conference, and we celebrate these connections through either in-person conversations or through the WUVA app. So stay tuned. Thank you very much, Jude and Julia, for this wonderful presentation and project.